Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to another episode of Hollywood Backlot with Lou and you. My name is VashSky, your host of today's ceremonies, and you see, I can't do the whole setup without messing up at least once. The one, the amazing, the astral with, I don't know, the amazement, I guess. I see. There you go. LW
There's a lot
Ghost.
of things I could rhyme with astral, none of which are suitable for a family program. But you're Vash, I'm Ghost, well. And they're you. Those people out there listening to us, and thank you for being here with us, folks.
Thank you so much. And
pay attention, it's Joe time.
Yeah, when you made that reference before,
some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
Some days you can't. And I think Disney, they're looking at Snow White and going, how do we get rid of this thing in the best way possible right here? What do I do? That's a whole lot of fun in and of itself right here. Let me see. I think I have the stream going on in the background. StreamYard's been giving us a world of issues. I'm going to go ahead and try and get my screen shared with y'all because I think LW Ghost has something that he wants to talk about. Specifically, a book that he found very, very interesting. Let me just make sure that people can see it.
Oh, good.
Give us a second. Oh,
okay, folks.
Looks like it worked.
Now,
go ahead.
This is put together by this Janine Besinger, who also did the one we recommended to you in the past. But here's what this is. Several years ago, thank God, the Academy, the TV Academy, the Directors Guild, lots of people started realizing they better get people to talk about their lives before they weren't around to do it anymore. Oral history is the technical term for this kind of a process. I don't know, but I would suggest all of you do it with any grandparents that are still around. I did with mine and found out all kinds of things. And it was all sort of inspired by back when Roots was a big deal, and everybody was talking about the history of their families and what have you. But anyway, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences did oral histories of everybody. People you've never heard of, people you've heard of a lot. These people went into those oral histories with their permission and put them together into basically, if you had all those people on the stage at the same time and had them tell the story of Hollywood from the very beginnings and tell the story of how did they get there and what was it like in the Wild Westy sort of silent days and how it changed when sound came in and how it changed when color came in. And God, there's some great stories in here. And it reads like you're having a conversation with all of these people. And even if you don't know their names, and of course I know more of them than most of you probably do, it's just fantastic. For example, just one that comes to mind. Edith Head was going to art school. And she saw this ad that Cecil B. DeMille was looking for people to design costumes. And she thought, well, I'm not really doing fashion, but I can draw. So what the hell? And she went in and there were 12 or 14 other people there competing for the job. And they set them all an assignment. They said, draw jodhpurs or draw whatever. Well, how she got into the competition was she brought a portfolio. The problem is most of her painting up to that time and her drawing were landscapes, not people. So she went to her friends at the art school and said, hey, give me a couple of years and a couple of years and a couple of years. And she put them all in her own book as her portfolio. And it never occurred to anybody that that was dishonest or deceptive. It was just, hey, it's the Depression, get a job, And the DeMille people saw it and said, we've never seen anybody with such a broad range of talent. My God, you're amazing. You're hired. And another guy who did costumes said, well, I just, I was designing stuff. And so I drew some pictures. Then they told me I had to make them. Well, I'd never even sewn before. And so I got some friends and we got some fabric and we made it work. That's how it was. That's how it was with the camera people, with the directors, with the art directors. It was whatever works. And the gag men and all these people that sat around throwing, ideas around and, okay, that's good. We'll do that. We'll do that. Because remember, A, there was no written script per se because there was no dialogue because it was silent. And B, the camera didn't record any sound, so you could yell stuff and do stuff and play music and whatever during shooting, which, of course, when sound came in, became a big problem, not only because you couldn't do all of that, but because the cameras were noisy as hell. There was a motor running in there, and it was flopping all those frames by, and they had to build these huge, basically rooms on wheels made out of padding and soundproofing, and with a optical glass window to shoot through from the inside. And of course, there was no such thing as air conditioning. If there had, it would have made noise. So they'd shoot as long as they could, and then they'd open the door, and the camera people inside that little box were damn near suffocated. Anyway, you'll read all of this and a lot more in this amazing book, which I strongly recommend to you. And if you're interested in how the movies happen, they've got more stories than I do.
That's great. That's fantastic. I gotta get into this book right here. This sounds truly amazing, truly epic, and awesome. By the way, I think Amazon. Look at this hardcover, $20.
Yeah,
Not
sure.
bad.
Well, the Kindle is $2, so there you go.
There you go. Definitely check this one out here. If Lou recommends it, you know it's gonna be good. You know it's gonna be good. Lou's read a lot of books over the years.
There you go. Gleaned from nearly 3,000 interviews involving 400 voices from the industry.
Ooh.
So, when you're talking everybody from Meryl Streep to Harold Lloyd to Frank Capra to Alfred Hitchcock.
Did the homework.
And they talk about the personal scandals and the sex scandals and Fatty Arbuckle and the wild parties and all the rest of that stuff too. So it's not just the mechanics of the movies, but it's about what LA, what Hollywood was. It was this cow town out there in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And what it became.
See, Ron, there's something in there for you too. I'm busting Ron's chops a little bit based on his comments in the chat right there.
Oh, what did he say?
We love you, Ron.
You came for the tech, returned for the sex, or something like that, right?
Oh boy, yeah, that's just about it. Deborah here. Lou has great book recommendations. I am getting this book from my library. Thanks, Lou. Well, thank you,
My
Deborah.
pleasure, Deborah. You will enjoy it.
Absolutely. Yep, they sure did and know what they were doing. But I like the fly by night kind of era of Hollywood, right? Like you said,
well, you could try stuff and see if it worked. And then, of course, the big problem is I'm getting into the part of the book I'm in now is when sound came in, you had all these movies that were kind of in the editing and post-production process that were silent. And it was like, I think, who was it? Somebody, one of the studios said they had over $1 million invested in this stuff and they couldn't just throw it away. But on the other hand, it was unwanted. So the one guy, he was complimented by the fact that we think the one you're working on is so good, we'd like you to make it 25% sound. So he had to go through and pick out the 2 or 3 scenes he thought he could reshoot cheaply with sound. And that's how they did it. Anyway, you'll see. It's if you didn't even care about the production details and the technical details, which being here, I guess you do, the personal stories and the relationships and of course everybody did their own stunts. One of the loudest voices in this is a guy named Hoot Gibson, who was a cowboy, and he talks about it was $25 if you could get thrown from a horse and get off again. And so he tried to put 4 or 5 of those in every movie he did, so he'd get the $25 every time, And I mean, it was a very mercenary thing, but these people were making money in the depths of the Depression, 1922, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, on into there. And these people were making I forget who it was, but they said, well, I was making $18,000 a week. And of course, the other thing was there was little or no tax. So you could get rich in a hurry. And a lot of people, they talk about a few of them, they spent every dime and they wound up broke when their fortunes faded. But boy, they had a great time in the meanwhile. So
sure.
And they talk about the parties people threw at their houses and how they catered them and how they... Anyway, I'll stop. You read it. You'll get even more out of it than I've given you. I trust.
Indeed. Ken Reinhardt asks, what was life like before color? And he continues here. Was it easier to pick up
All
your
I know
clothes?
is the world is. Well, that's interesting too, Ken, because, for example, they mentioned when they switched over um, emulsions, not for color really, but for black and white, but because the panchromatic film, the new film, as opposed to the prior one, had a different spectrum that it picked up on in black and white.
Mhm.
And so they talked about a woman who was a redhead, who in the old one always came off as a brunette. And so when they started reshooting in the panchromatic for the sound scenes, for lots of reasons, she walked through one door as a brunette and came out the other door as a blonde because panchromatic rendered her hair a different color. Uh,
Whoa.
anyway. And then they said the sound men, when the sound men came in, all they cared about was the sound. And you couldn't do multiple tracks. Everything had to be on the same track.
Ooh,
So, because that's all they had.
sure.
And so it was, you've got to put the microphone right there, smack dab in the middle where it'll hear them, which meant in a flower vase or in a hat or some guy literally invented, in the business, we have what we commonly call the fishpole microphone. Guess what?
Yeah.
It really was a fishpole when they started using it that way. Somebody got the bright idea. What if we hung it over them instead of,
Right.
and it led to a different style of shooting too, because when they brought in all the theater people to direct, they were used to directing the proscenium arch, which the movies had gotten away from with moving cameras and close-ups. And it kind of was a retrograde in the art of the photography for the sake of dialogue and sound. And well, I've always joked in the business talking about how the camera guys and the sound guys are like the cattlemen and the sheepmen in the Old West fighting over the territory. And I'll never forget watching a rehearsal one time on Cheers. And if you remember the Cheers set, the bar obviously was in the middle, but then upstage, audience left, stage right, there was kind of a back area with a bunch of tables. And Jim Burroughs was directing that day. And Rhea Perlman came out and said her line. And Burroughs said, "Great, Rhea, that's great, but could you come 4 more steps downstage before you deliver the line?" And being an actor, she said, "Well, what's my motivation?" And he said, "I can't see or hear you up there." Because it was back underneath these headers that they couldn't get a microphone into or couldn't get a camera to get the right angle on. So there's all these realities,
Right.
you have to deal with. Or
They
I remember
have-
when they came up with the single cam, the pedestal system, they called it. Ped cams, still film, but on an old-time movie or TV pedestal rather than on a dolly with 3 guys.
Mm.
And it was on Harry and the Hendersons that they were practicing it, the TV show.
Mhm.
And they start shooting and I'm going to need a ceiling piece here, and I'm going to need a ceiling piece here, and I'm going to need a ceiling piece here, because he's swinging through the rafters, and every time the camera slightly went too high, you'd see the rafters of the studio, of the soundstage. Anyhow. Should we go from that to music, Maestro, and get that?
Oh, I think we shall. I think that's.
We've
that
been
sounds like
doing a
great
feature
idea.
on this show, folks, if you've been here a few weeks, called the Backlot JUKEBOX, where I've picked various audio tracks and audio curiosities. Well, I came across one. It actually inspired me to write a kind of an editorial that's going to be, if it isn't already soon, on the That Park Place website. And it's a compilation of all of the audio that was recorded for an attraction at original Epcot called the World of Motion, which was a GM-sponsored trip through the wonders of planes, trains, automobiles, all that kind of stuff. And it was a great, wonderful ride, and I am sorry for those of you too young to have experienced it. But while I was listening to all this great music, which brought back so much memories, and it's not just the music, it's the stuff they played outside the attraction. It's the stuff that was part of the medley of Future World attractions that they played at the front gate. It's obviously all of the voice tracks of Gary Owens doing the narration, which was also cheery and wonderful, and what's happening in front of you is total disaster, and that was the joke of the thing. And then it has all the music. When you came off the attraction, there was an area where they had all different little shows about things. There was one called The Water Engine, about which fuel is best. There was one called The Robot and the Bird back in the days before we knew much about industrial robots, where they had a minor bird animatronic and a robot doing a little dance. I remember there was one called, what's it called? The Lean Machine, but Lean as in leaning over, with this kind of three-wheel cycle leaning into a turn. And then, of course, they were showing off all the latest GM cars. All of that music is in here, too. And I sat here thinking, when they do an attraction today, would you even imagine they'd put in a budget to record an hour and a half's worth of various music tracks? Everything from banjo, plinkety-plink, barrel roll piano stuff, to big symphonic movie music, to jazz, it's all in here. And nowadays, what do? Well, you were telling me before the show, Vash, on Tiana, they strip tracks out of the movie because, hey, it's cheaper.
They took them right out, put them right in, and that wouldn't be a problem.
And nobody who proposed the recording of all this stuff for this attraction, and they have the same outfit. If you go look at their link, as other attractions, including my all-time favorite of Horizons, nobody would have thought twice. Nobody said, well, wait, can we do this much? Is it in the budget? They would just say, this is part of how we do a show at Disney. And so I wrote a little editorial about it, saying, putting aside the question of, oh, gee, they're tearing out the rivers of America, or, oh, gee, they're replacing Splash Mountain, or all those other issues, which can be social and political and cultural as well as artistic.
Right.
The first commandment, it seems to me, is you got to make it better to take out what's there. And you got to, it's like the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. Anyway, you'll read all of my musings at greater length on that subject on That Park Place, the website, which
Absolutely.
we encourage you to visit. Anyhow, but this music, just put it on and let it wash over you, as we did the other night here in the Luminance, the Lou Cave. I don't know what we'd call it, but what would you call it? You've been here.
Well, the Lou Abode.
Yeah, that works. Anyhow, that's all the goodies we prepared for you ahead of time. Aren't we nice?
Absolutely. Well, and also too, so a couple things on this. One, like you said, Tiana's Bayou Adventure. Yeah, they just took the tracks out, put them right in. Wouldn't be a problem if Ray the Firefly hadn't already expired by the time the story for that attraction should be.
But they've got Dancing Okra.
I got Dancing Okra. So there you go. It all balances out in the end. We actually just recently heard that Universal actually confirmed that there's going to be 40 hours of musical content within Epic Universe, 14 of which is original, over, I believe, 16 different sound zones. So,
well, when you say original, you mean originally composed. They're going to re-record music from the movies involved. Obviously, you can't do Harry Potter without the Harry Potter music, but that doesn't mean you pull it from the movie. It means you adapt it to the instance where it is, just as they've done at Hogwarts and Diagon Alley and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. It's really, really cool. So there are parks out there that are putting an emphasis on music, obviously, and wow, if we can just get that John Williams score into Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, that'd be fantastic. But in lieu of that, we have some amazing, both historical sonic symphonies, like the one we just shared right now, and some new stuff that will be opening on May 22nd of 2025?
Yep.
Pretty cool. Pretty awesome.
Yep.
What's not so awesome, however, is, well, James Bond being acquired by Jeff Bezos. Yes, we dedicated our last show pretty much in its entirety to James Bond, the history of that. This article just was published, however, and I kind of wanted to go over it with the audience here.
I just love the illo of Bezos as Blofeld. So
yes, I love that as well.
It's very much the Donald Pleasance Blofeld with Scar and.
Indeed. Licensed to shill inside Amazon's 007 takeover. It's the Bonds movie's most shocking plot twist in decades. But will the tech giant's surprise buyout of the franchise prove deadly? or could it breathe new life into cinema's most famous spy? This is by Benjamin Svetsky of March 7th, 2025 here. Let's see, scroll all the way down. It was a bombshell development that caught much of Hollywood by surprise. What could have compelled them to do it? After so many, that'd be, by the way, Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson, who were
What could have compelled them to do it?
Indeed.
$1 billion and the fact that they didn't need this aggravation anymore. I would have done it for half as much.
Well, that's it, right? So we'll go over it. What could have compelled them to do it after so many years of fiercely protecting their father's business? Eon Productions, the company that's been in charge of 007 since the character first swaggered onto the screen in 1962, why would they decide to unload it? And to Amazon, no less, the sprawling global syndicate run by the bald-headed rocket-building billionaire Ernst Stavro Bezos. It makes even less sense than the plot of No Time to Die. Ooh! Yikes. More pointedly, what does the sale mean of Bond's future? Amazon, of course, had purchased MGM bonds a long-time home in 2022 for $8.5 billion, mostly to get its hands on the 007 IP and build into a Marvel-style universe filled with bingeable TV spin-offs. Ugh, don't like that at all. The only thing stopping them were Broccoli and Wilson, who had very different ideas for their father's legacy, as well as a decades-long deal with MGM guaranteeing them creative dominion over all things Bond. But now that they're out of the picture, Amazon can do whatever it wants. A TV show about Moneypenny? Why not? Why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. A prequel about Blofeld's teenage years? Sure. More 007 game shows? Please no, but anything is possible. Amazon is now free to milk the franchise dry.
Oh, please. Young Blofeld. He's like at a prep school in Switzerland, and he's killing the other kids' science experiments with radiation or something, right?
Yes.
I don't know. And as for Moneypenny, in this day and age, they would have to make it a guy in drag.
Well, you have to be inclusive there. Don't let anyone else screw it up. Cubby Broccoli warned his children before he died. You can screw it up if you want to, but don't let other people screw it up. Barbara, 64, was 2 years old when Dr. No opened in the UK. By the time she was a teenager, she was working on her dad's movies. Michael, 83, took a more circuitous route to the family business, studying law and engineering before officially joining the franchise in 1972, though he did have an early gig as an extra in 1964's Goldfinger. The point is, Broccoli and Wilson were practically raised on the 007 soundstage at Pinewood. Bond is in their blood, so when they inherited their father's franchise, they took his words to heart. Quote, "For Barbara and Michael, it's always been franchise first," says one Bond insider. Nothing else got in the way. Ooh, it talks about how it talks about the studio performance and everything like that, and how they, were keeping with their father or stepfather, his wishes and so forth to protect the franchise and all of that. I want to get down here, though. Let's see. Those last 5 Craig movies turned out to be the most profitable in the franchise's history, each grossing more than $500 million. And one of them, 2012's Skyfall, becoming the first Bond film to gross more than $1 billion at the box office. Obviously, those numbers were a large part of Amazon's calculations to buy MGM in 2021. They certainly didn't spend $8.5 billion for Pink Panther. Broccoli and Wilson were said to be nervous about the sale of the nearly 100-year-old studio to the 21st century tech conglomerate. But they knew that even under new management, they'd retain creative control. Amazon knew that too, but executives there like Mike Hopkins, head of Prime Video, or Jennifer Soke, head of Amazon Studios, we've heard about Soke, apparently believed that they could sweet-talk the Broccoli's into expanding the brand beyond the single Bond film Eon had been putting out every 2 or 3 years. As Dr. No himself would put it, however, that was very foolish. Oh, boy. So from what I understand, Lou, the Broccoli and Wilson had been staving off a lot of Amazon's wishes for a little while there.
Oh, yeah.
And they had aspirations to make this a Marvel-style universe with TV shows and all this kind of stuff. I don't know. Do you think that would work at all?
Here's what I do know.
Please.
It has been, sadly, the history of this industry that when they take an existent IP, Maybe it's a TV show like Maverick, or it's or the Wild Wild West are the two that come to mind. And they say, we're going to make a feature film universe out of this because what's the motivation? It's got a built-in audience of people who love it. And then the first thing they do is take out of it everything that people loved. I mean, you can relatively criticize the Maverick movie with, but the first thing you do is anybody who ever watched Maverick, that theme song, for God's sakes.
Yep.
And it's gone. And Wild Wild West, same thing.
Right.
And speaking of Wild Wild West, there's a very funny but not safe for work comedian in Britain named Jimmy Carr that some of you may be familiar with. And he does a lot of razzing and spoofing from the audience and taking questions. And I was watching one of his clips on YouTube the other day. It was taken shortly after the big Will Smith slap of Chris Rock and all the rest of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And somebody asked him, well, what do you think of Will Smith? And he turned to them and he said, I honestly think he is one of the greatest actors in the past 50 years, because for the past 20, he's totally convinced us all that he's a nice guy, when, in fact, of course, he's a word that begins with C and ends in T. He said, now that's acting, So,
right.
But the fact that they try to put everything into it and then take everything out of it at the same time is always just astounded me. It's like, what did you get it for? Well, because we're smarter than those other guys. It's the obverse of the same phenomenon, which is when there's a new boss at a given studio, the first thing that happens is the advertising and publicity for everything that's still in the pipeline from the old guy gets cut to the bone. So those movies will fail too. So he can say, see, you were right to get rid of me. That other guy made a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. And I think
even if you're Amazon and you totally disagree with Broccoli about which way it should go and what should happen, don't you have to acknowledge a little bit the experience of making all of those movies and being intimately involved with 25 movies and all of them successful? I mean, when they said something was a flop, it was a flop by Bond standards, not by the world's.
That's very true.
And it's funny. I was talking about all this with the genre guys the other night because we just recorded we broke a new genre, which is documentary, and it's a movie about Drew, the guy that illustrated all the classic Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Back to the Future and all the great posters that we know and love. Mm-hmm. And he's retired now, but I said if Amazon had any sense, which remains to be seen, if and when they put together a new Bond movie, they should hire him to do the poster.
Right.
But anyway.
Well, the Broccoli has something to say about that as well. We just try to focus on making good pictures, and it takes time. It takes a couple of years, Wilson said in an interview shortly after MGM's sale to Amazon was announced, telegraphing to his new owners his unwillingness to put Bond on television. Quote, putting all that energy into making 10 or 20 hours of a TV show, that's a big commitment. We'd have to delegate to do that, and we've been very reluctant to delegate. His half-sister expressed it even more bluntly in an interview, quote, it's not something we've ever wanted to do, she said.
And see, now wait, that whole issue of delegating, because you have to, because TV is a multi-writer, multi-producer medium, as opposed to a single feature.
Of course.
Whereas the boss, you have the ability to lay down the law. Reminds me of an experience I had many, many, many years ago, and I can't get too specific, but a very, very famous Broadway playwright, great playwright, wonderful guy. I'm not knocking him, but they decided to buy one of his plays, frankly, one that wasn't as famous, to make a TV show out of it. And he made the deal and they started production, and he decided to come out to LA and meet everybody involved. And they introduced him to the staff of 12 writer producer types. And he said, all of these people were people I knew nothing about. All of these people whose work I looked at and thought was kind of mediocre. And all of them were in charge of my baby. And all of them were making more money than I was. And he told me the story as a way of telling me how awful Hollywood was compared to the theater. And there are lots of ways that it is and it isn't, and that's not the point. The point is, my reaction to the story is blame your agent. If you didn't get a good enough deal to preserve all of that, it's not their fault for making the deal. It's his fault for letting them make it.
Yeah.
So, yes, you'd have to delegate, and no, you don't want to, and therefore you don't. And look, all of the Bond movies that they made and that their father made are still out there for people to see. I don't know any of them that have been edited for trigger warnings or whatever yet, although God only knows. So your legacy is untarnished by what comes next. And I think they finally had to make their peace with that and the fact that, frankly, they're not young. And it's 2 or 3 years of your life to make one of these movies. And when I say your life, I mean every moment from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, in places all over the world with lots of different people and big money and big budgets, big crews, big casts. And frankly, in my personal opinion, the fact that they were worn out from doing it is why that last movie was so bad, which I think it was. I think it was terrible. It did well, and everybody went to see, Daniel Craig's official swan song. But, oh, man, I guarantee you their father would never approve that script.
No, that script was absolutely terrible. Even the Hollywood Reporter made fun of it. I mean, not so good. Relations, you can see right here within this paragraph kind of what transpired and what Amazon MGM had in store for the franchise and so forth. Relations grew even frostier after a meeting in which Salke reportedly mortified Broccoli by calling Bond, quote, content. Wilson, meanwhile, was said to be complaining about how he'd been unable to meet up with Amazon's top brass. Neither Amazon nor Eon could be reached for comment on any of the above, but it's clear that the 3 years since Amazon purchased MGM and the 6 years since production wrapped on No Time to Die, zero progress has been made in getting 007 back on screen. There's no script for a next movie, no director, and most critically, no Bond. Sources say that Amazon had suggested a few actors, but none the Broccoli's would sign off on. In fact, the only Bond, quote, content that's come out of Amazon is Prime's little-noticed game show 007 Road to a Million. Oof. Not good right there. Yeah, it's... that's not good.
Unwatchable.
Oh, no good.
And since nobody around here pays me to watch movies so you don't have to, I didn't after the first 10 minutes.
Exactly. Meanwhile, as the franchise sputtered and stalled, Wilson, nearly 20 years older than Broccoli, decided to retire, leaving Barbara on her own with the Amazonians. The half-siblings, their mother was Dana Natal, Cubby's second wife, couldn't be more different. She's liberal, he's conservative. Her passion is storytelling, and he's more into the production engineering side of it. But they had complementary skill sets, and they had absolute trust and faith in one another. Quote, they didn't always agree, says one source, but they had a way of working through a resolution that would both stand by. They never tried to do an end run around each other. They were always in it together. Wilson's departure was one of the big factors in Broccoli ultimately deciding to walk away from the franchise. After 30 years of Bond movies, she no longer had the stomach or stamina for the endless studio battles or years-long Bond production marathons, certainly not on her own. And there was no obvious successor, not even Wilson's son Greg, who's been working on the recent films, but who, insiders say, wasn't considered ready to step into his father's shoes. And in any case, it all came to a head in December, a month after Broccoli and Wilson picked up the Thalberg at the Governor's Awards. That's when the Wall Street Journal published a piece detailing the chilly state of affairs between Amazon and the Broccoli's, in which Barbara was quoted as telling friends that Amazon executives were, quote, effing idiots. Not surprisingly, those choice words did not go over well with Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. Quote, he read her quote in the Journal and got on the phone and said, I don't care what it costs, get rid of her. And that's how one insider describes what happened next. Sources close to the company strongly refute that Bezos made any such remark and deny that the Journal's reporting had an impact on negotiations, noting that, quote, discussions about a joint venture took place over the better part of a year. Either way, insiders say that Bezos would end up paying close to $1 billion for the franchise.
I will point out, however, if you are negotiating and if you see yourself eventually walking away in reality, even though you don't tell the world, the first thing you want to do is make the other guy say, I don't care what it costs. So there may be some machination on both sides involved in this whole thing. So
and remember, we were talking about this last week, Lou, that, hey, was it potentially a strategy by Broccoli and Wilson to show disinterest in a deal or show disinterest in moving forward with the franchise in order to get as much money as they possibly could? So saying that,
a
hey,
kiddly divey too, wouldn't you?
I mean, it's interesting. It is interesting. Go and Shogi's exactly right. She wasn't wrong. Yeah, not wrong, especially when you look at the Lord of the Rings franchise and so forth, and what Amazon has already sunk their claws into. Hasn't been all that successful. So,
well, look, the bottom line on all of this is, until Amazon actually makes something Bond, whether it's a TV show or a feature or what, we really won't know whether they've got it or they don't.
And but we do know some things, Lou. Deadline has this article right here. We won't get into all of it, but Deadline, James Bond, quote, will remain British and male under Amazon's management of the character. Report by Caroline Frost, March 9th.
And a year later, the report could be, no, we're actually tearing out the rivers of America to make them. Exactly. So I just, these reports.
Grain of salt, right?
And I look on the right side of that page, the second story down.
Sure.
Bill Maher says Honora won over Emilia Perez at the Oscars because cancel culture is still with us. So in a battle of A, a movie about a whore fighting oligarchs, and B, a movie about a sex change drug cartel murderer, cancel culture is the reason, right? If there really was cancel culture based on any kind of standards, those two movies would never get made. End of story. So anyway,
it's go ahead.
That's all I'm saying is all of these commitments to we're going to keep him male and we're going to keep him British, and unless we decide not to,
essentially, yeah. I mean that's
so
all.
It's as I said about Disney and headlines about scaffolding in front of a ride. Everything's a story now. Everything is headline news. Everything is a report. Even when it's inconsequential, easily walk away from a bull. I mean, the report said that Broccoli said never, 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 never. Well, never say never again. It's the answer to that. See that there. Wait. Last paragraph. James Bond has been one of the big screen's great icons. Back in a day when we didn't use that word every 12 seconds without understanding what it meant. And the obvious question we might ask if we were dealing with the real world is, does a British spy matter anymore?
I mean, that's the big thing.
I mean, the Brits have one or two aircraft carriers and a few cruisers and a couple of submarines that are getting very old. I was just reading a story, totally different subject, but earlier this morning about the Europeans all rattling their sabers and talking about, they're going to fight back against Russia and Ukraine. And they haven't got the men. They haven't got the guns. They haven't got the tanks. They haven't got anything. And it would take them a decade to build up to what they used to have before they basically said, well, we don't have to pay for any of that stuff. America does. I mean, they gave one example on like a AWACS kind of a spy plane. And they said Britain, the entire EU, has 2. America has 19 in Europe. And it's like that all the way down the line. So, I mean, James Bond, although granted he was defending the entire world from evil people, was defending the British Empire. Well, the British Empire died when Winston Churchill did. How it was relevant to England, it was great they had a hero. I'm all for it. I love every one of them in their own way. But how relevant to today's world is it's a British spy working for England? Oh, really? Oh, okay. This is the same England where you can get arrested for hate speech if you dare disagree with a public figure.
That's a good.
How does that compare to Spectre and Smersh?
One could say that the villains already won. Here we go. I would like this might go and choke you, by the way. I would like to see Bond as a period piece. Smartphones take a lot of the excitement.
They
out
certainly
of it.
do. They certainly do. You're right. And all the other tech that we have now.
Right.
Back then, they actually had to survive on their wits, on their. I'm the guy on the scene, therefore I make the decision. That's what the license to kill was. It was. We can't be in touch with you 24/7. We can't send out a JAG officer to adjudicate whether you have a right to kill that guy. You got to do it yourself.
Right.
It was, we trust you enough and we'll cover for you if you screw up, which was the way everything was done, of course, during World War II with the OSS and the underground and all the rest of that stuff. Oop, where'd Vash go, I wonder?
Oh, I'm here. I'm here. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I had to
Well,
go off screen
that's-
for just a second.
Anyway, I think what's going to happen to Bond remains to be seen.
Amnuck is exactly correct in that, and yes, it does remain to be seen. Again,
Well,
there's minimal
Amnuck,
circulating.
I would beg to differ. Maybe not in this era, but certainly if they go back to the original, because remember that the whole reason that people who were not just gay, but of some less than the majority sexual orientation or weakness, as it was known then, were kept out of security matters was that they were subject to blackmail by the other side.
Right.
And
That's a
indeed,
good
when you
point.
get into Burgess and McLean and Blunt and all of those spies of that era, there was a lot of John Profumo and the Mandy Rice Davies things. I'm mentioning a bunch of names some of you probably won't know, but go look them up. They were all the spies of England that were caught largely because they were found to be of what was then considered to be an aberrant sexual orientation or proclivity. And that means straight or gay. Anyway, that's
You see?
all I'm saying is if nobody cares anymore, then okay, you're immune. But if some people do, you got a problem. So anyway.
See, Lou? That's the plot for the next movie. He's gonna keep he's gonna keep his real identity a secret.
Besides which, can I say this? You censor me if I can't. I don't want to get us in trouble.
Okay.
If the lust object for the next James Bond is named Pricky Galore, does that quite have the same ring to it? And now we move on from James Bond to Technicolor.
Yes, now we move on from James Bond, but we're living in a brand new age, aren't we? Hopefully they do take James
It's a great,
Bond
big,
to-
beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day. I don't know. Maybe shining is not the word. Maybe fierce at the end of every day.
I do hope they do right by James Bond and take him back to an era by which those things were fascinating to witness. Let's see here. We have another story actually. Yeah, Deborah, exactly. We have another story, which is I think is very, very interesting, and I'm so glad that Lou is here with us right now because I really want to deep dive into this. Again, we usually color Hollywood history, not necessarily Hollywood news and so forth, but this little bit of history right here. We didn't know this existed. I mean, I think we hear rumblings of it, but now we know a lot more than we did before. Here we go, Lou. From Forbes, George Lucas's scrapped Star Wars TV show reportedly cost $40 million per episode. This is by Paul Tassi here, March 8th, 2025. You may have heard about the tragedy of George Lucas the Wise, where before he ended up selling Star Wars to Disney, he had it in mind that he was going to make a sprawling Star Wars television series. Now, of course, we have many of those on Disney+. But a new interview on the Young Indie Chronicles podcast with producer Rick McCallum, who was working with Lucas on the series back in the early 2000s, has now detailed just how insane this would have been. Listen to this. The show, Star Wars Underworld, that's awesome, was supposed to be more dark, I think I can say that, sexy, and more violent than any Star Wars production before it. At that point, keep in mind, it was just the last 6 Lucas movies. There were a full 60 scripts written for the series. You don't believe that?
I don't believe there were a full 60 scripts. They might have had 60 1 and 2 paragraph
Outlines.
scenarios and treatments because somebody in any idea for a series says, well, how's this going to last? Or when will it run out of ideas?
Right.
60 full scripts.
That's a lot.
Even in those days, that meant that 60 people actually got paid Writers Guild minimum to write full scripts. They just spent the $40 million right there, never mind on production. So
There were. That's what it says. The show was meant to connect to the video game Star Wars 1313. That was cool. Another project that ended up canceled, where Lucas offered direct, often incredibly tough feedback to implement input about its direction. One day, famously, he said the game should simply star Boba Fett when they were a ways into it already. The most eye-popping aspect of it, of this, is that Underworld was reportedly going to cost $40 million per episode. $20 million per episode series are the higher end now. It's also important to keep in mind that this was back in the early 2000s. To get a sense of Lucas's idea scale here, John Williams was supposed to score the entire series.
I don't believe that
HBO
either. He'd write the
no
main
way, right?
themes, but there's just, I mean, if you went to John Williams and said, hey, I've got a movie, great, that's what I do. If you said, I want you to commit the next 5 years of your life to scoring every moment of 60 episodes of forget it. He would say the same thing that Barbara Broccoli did, which is, I don't need this aggravation, you know?
There's no way.
So anyway.
That's a lot right there. Did John
This whole
Williams
story
find
is specious to me. So that's just the way. I mean, not that there was not such a plan. I'm sure there was. But the details start to become impossible.
who could somebody in the chat, because I really want to know this answer, and I could look it up, but chat, somebody look up, did John Williams score all of the episodes connected to the Indiana Jones Chronicles? Because that would give you your answer right there as to whether or not John Williams would even be interested in the project.
And say
like that.
score,
Before,
not
it
just
wouldn't have
theme
been
song, and not just major themes.
Right. Right. Because he didn't do the Clone Wars, that's for sure. So why would he do this necessarily? HBO was the only network even possibly entertaining this, but there was ultimately just no way at that price. A weird twist was that Lucas was set to have a meeting with HBO CEO Chris Albrecht, I believe, at Skywalker
Albrecht.
Ranch, but a day before, Albrecht was arrested for assault, and HBO later forced him to resign.
I would keep him from making the appointment, that's for sure. But
Indeed it would. Finally, here's Rick McCallum saying this. I mean, it would have blown up the entire Star Wars universe, and Disney definitely would have never offered to buy Star Wars from George. It's one of the great disappointments of our lifetime. So,
I think the whole damn story is BS.
you
I
think
just
so?
do. I just do. I'm not saying that this wasn't under consideration or that, but all of these people just speculating the crap out of, well, he was going to score all, and they had scripts for 60. Bullshit. Without a go, George was not an idiot then.
And he was very price conscious as well. As
Of course he was. Famously so. Famously so. He would go to people and they'd say, well, we can't do that for less than X. And he'd say, well, find a way or we don't do it. So this whole thing seems kind of, but then,
keep in mind, too,
gone from being a bastion of truth to something less these days, too. So
all of Phantom Menace, I believe, we just played that clip recently on this show, actually, going over that meeting in which he was talking with the VFX guys and so forth. I think the whole thing was $50 million. That was Phantom Menace. So to produce a show at $40 million a piece is wild. Just like what, 15 years later? There's no way. I mean, there's no way. That's a thing. No, not even 15 years. It would have been that's 1999, so it would have been 7 years later. So I'm not sure that's really the case right there. I think let me do the math on that actually.
and all of our chat people are saying, no, John Williams did not do Young Indy, and talking about various people who did lots of other Star Wars spin-off things. And
Lawrence Rosenthal and George Neely still the final for the Indiana Jones Chronicles, it looks like. So that's who.
And it doesn't mean they didn't get inspired by. They'd have to be. The Indy theme would have to show up in there somewhere. But if you look at credits, you'll see something like original theme by somewhere down below the music credits.
If HBO produced that show at $40 million a piece and 60 episodes, that would have been $2.4 billion. That was over half the price of the entire Star Wars
That would be the end of
franchise back in the
HBO.
day.
We would not know of HBO anymore today.
Yes, exactly.
That's all. Although,
So-
if we see this money that the story of the day is the money that Netflix paid Sussex, a.k.a. Meghan Markle. And then they announced, no, we paid her a lot of money. We have a second series because they shot 2, apparently, not just one.
They did, yes.
And did you see the story in Breitbart today of the backlash from that? Oh, dear God, it's hilarious.
If you have it.
Yeah, hang
you
on.
have
Let
it.
me find it here.
You can grab it here.
There we go. Let's see. Well, I mean, I'll find you the link in a minute, but it's the things that people have said. They said that most of the ratings are coming from what a whole new term in our world, hate viewing.
It is rough.
This
folks.
is
I don't
literally
know
the
if you
most
saw.
basic, uninspired content I've ever seen, one ex-user reacted. My local grocery store makes better fruit rainbows. It's not creative, it's not original, it's boring, and even worse with her insufferable banter. This show is going to suck. Then here's somebody who says, I just saw 8 episodes and they're worse than you can imagine. I'm going, why didn't you turn it off after 2 or 3 or 4? Did you hope it was going to get better? Oh, social media users picked the show to pieces, pointing out that all of Markle's, quote, recipes can be found on Pinterest, while others laughed at the Duchess for emptying Trader Joe's peanut butter-filled pretzels into a plastic bag. Quote, so glad Netflix contracted Meghan Markle to put out such amazing content, as Chuck's notes, emptying pretzels from one plastic bag to another.
I mean, they were really, really brutal. If I have my notes here, I'll
I don't know
read
why
a
I
couple
can't
of
light
these
up
things.
this link, but for some reason I'm having trouble with it.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Okay,
Oh.
Let's see. And this goes to you back in that dark corner of the universe, and then you can go from there. There.
Okay.
But all I'm saying is this idea that, oh, God, you can't pay that kind of money. It's going to kill the joint. Well, Netflix can because they've got more money than God. The Duchess of Delusion.
Netflix done with Meghan Markle.
Netflix shelled out millions for this gripping masterclass in snack transfer.
One Hollywood insider claims Netflix is done with Meghan Markle after her With Love Meghan debut was savaged.
Here's one. What I have learned from Meghan Markle's show. She's an effing drunk who doesn't look after any children and has serious main character syndrome.
Ooh, man.
Anyway.
That's tough.
People thought when they announced, oh no, there's season 2, that meant they were going to buy and build and shoot another one. No, it meant they shot 2 at a time, hoping.
Yeah.
And once they shot it, by God, it's cheaper to put it on the air than 2. Even see Netflix. Attention, Disney Plus. Netflix doesn't lose subscribers over stuff like this.
No.
And they get ratings, even if it's from hate viewing or whatever they're calling it. Swell, we don't care. Now we got something else for you about a movie about well, we used to have a movie about a galaxy far away, but those other guys thought they could make more money selling it themselves. Ha ha for them. When we talk about the whole financial disaster that is Disney Plus, we talk about the costs, but we don't mention enough to me. There you go. 8 watts. That's it. We don't talk about the lost opportunity cost. If you think that, for example, they recently made a big deal about that they released these Pixar movies like Soul and the others and didn't make any money, but they would have made money selling them to Netflix with none of the risk, none of the expensive promotion,
Right.
none of the risk of losing 700,000, was it, subscribers in the last quarter? Because they don't know where the money comes from.
Well, this is interesting. So I was just reading an article in which Netflix said, or very early on, they have already dedicated about $19 billion towards content creation. Maybe it was a little bit less than that. Maybe it was like $15 billion towards content creation for the entire year. And people were saying, well, that's less than the year before. which was about $19 billion. And kind of emphasize that that's kind of early on, and we expect that to grow as time moves on. I remember back in 2021, Disney spent $30 billion towards content, much of that going to Disney Plus. And in 2022, they spent another $30 billion again, and with much of that going to Disney Plus. So, like you said, Lou, the cost of creating content for that platform, in terms of marketing, in terms of putting this stuff out there and risking it out there, and hey, maybe you may never get your money back. All those things were needless because they could have just sent that content over to Netflix.
And they don't pay attention to where the money comes from. They
Right.
made content as if it was going to come back in theater tickets sold, when in fact it's supposed to come back in subscriptions, which they're either giving away, packaging with other stuff, or losing.
It's
And now they're doing their best to screw up ESPN. So there you go.
yes. And we heard Dana Walden actually talk about that recently at that Morgan Stanley conference. Actually, I think it was the same conference that the Netflix CEO was at, providing us those numbers. So it's it really is something.
Right.
I mean, they're in a world of hurt right here. Netflix, they're looking to get this thing out as soon as possible because this is just dreadful right here. But hey, people love to hate, so hopefully they get at least a little bit of a hate.
I wonder if it's getting more viewers than Cuties. With other Netflix disasters.
Almost assuredly so, Lou. Almost assuredly
And
so.
it costs a lot more.
Well, yeah. Oof. Well, it's a Sussex. LW, you got to pay those Sussex wages, right? Very, very interesting. Well, that just about, I think, wraps up all of our show right here. We have your questions coming in as we speak. Well, there's a couple of them I want to go ahead and make topics on future shows. Lou?
Well, there were a lot of questions in the chat earlier about Technicolor and whether it was 2 strip or 3 strip or whatever strip. And people were getting kind of close, but no cigar. And speaking as somebody who actually has I actually got a tour of the old Hollywood Technicolor plant, which was actually packed up and sold lock, stock, and barrel to the Chinese many years ago.
Of course.
Let me explain what Technicolor was so everybody's got it straight. Modern color photography, as we know it, is a chemical process, by which I mean the light goes through, the chemicals on the film react to the different colors and get transformed and like that. But that's not what Technicolor was originally. Technicolor was a printing process. And that is, there were actually 3 strips of film going through that camera. And there you see them in beautiful turquoise, what was it called? Not cyan. Cyan is the other one. But anyway, yellow and purple and blue. And from those 3 colors, in greater or lesser amounts, you could make full color. And so what they did was each one passed in front of the camera in sync, and each one had a filter that only pulled that color light out of what you were seeing. Now, the first thing that meant was it was a very complex physical process of getting that stuff to go through there. The second thing that meant was you had to have a whole hell of a lot of light on that set for it to work, because it's not just penetrating one level, it's going through 3.
Yeah.
And therefore, the sets were hot. Oh my God, they were hot. And there was also, I think, if you got a picture of the Lotus anywhere, or I should have warned you, they built this thing called a Lotus, which looked like a lotus flower, and it was made out of white card. And they would put that in the set at the beginning of every take and shoot it and then pull it out, because that gave them the balance of what true white was with which they could adjust the printing. But when I say printing, I mean those, again, black and white film, but exposed to only one color part of the spectrum. Emulsions literally were dipped in dye of that color and pressed physically like a printing plate, like a woodblock print, like a rubber stamp, against a blank piece of film, and then the second layer and the third layer, and the result was a Technicolor print. And That's how it was done. And they were beautiful. And, they were rich in color because they were a printing process. They were, if the 4-color printing of comic books, the same idea. But it was lithography as much as it was photography. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And an amazing process. One that produced very rich colors, I will say.
But it also, when I went to the lab, they talked about, remember, a reel of film is, I think it's 10,000 feet. It's about 8-9 minutes, almost 10 minutes worth of film. Mm-hmm. And it's a loop because these 3 loops are going through the factory, dipping in the dye, pressing against the blank clear matrix, and moving on and going all around and rolling on in sync with each other. And you know what film does? It breaks. And they had alarms that would think you were on a nuclear submarine about to get depth charged in this factory. They played them for me just because, hey, here's what it was like.
Sure.
It was an astoundingly steampunky sort of technology. You know what I mean? It didn't feel modern in any way. But hey, it worked and it created some beautiful things. So there you go.
Absolutely crazy, and we've gone over obviously the how hot those sets were, like Wizard of Oz, for example, having it be over 100 degrees on that soundstage. So
yeah, like about 110. And of course, you couldn't run air conditioning because in those days, either they didn't have it or it was noisy, and you were recording sound. So when they opened the big, what we call the elephant doors, the big, large doors on a soundstage, was the first time you got a little aeration. And we've told that story 100 times about Wizard of Oz, so I won't bother to do it again.
Right.
But
amazing stuff for sure. But you can go ahead and send us your questions at c3bonline@yahoo.com. Like I said, there's a couple in there, but we'd love to get more, so please go ahead and send us whatever you got there. Oh, I think somebody also mentioned too. Just go ahead and feature this just a little bit right here. We're talking about Star Wars, and so I kind of wanted to feature this real fast. Apparently, our first, I don't know if it's our first character, but a famous expanded universe character, Mara Jade, now has her lightsaber being sold, actually, by Disney, which is very interesting because they pretty much did away with this character. So that's odd. But hey, you know what? There you go. 3,500 of them made, so good luck.
I was going to say, there got to be 3,500 fans out there willing to cough up the money. And so it's all a question of the volume. I mean, there used to be an old joke about a guy who says, hey, I'm in a great new business. Oh, what are you doing? I'm selling elephants. Elephants?
What?
Isn't that kind of a limited market? He says, yeah, but at the price, I only have to sell one. So
exactly right there.
There is an old saying. I'm damned if I can remember who said it, but he said, everything is worth what the customer will pay for it. So
right.
Somewhere there are 3,500 Mara Jade people out there. But see, now that's interesting.
What?
Anticipating the number. And it has to do with, well, how many do we think we can sell versus what does it cost to make them? If we make them this many, is it cheaper than making, less or more? Or there's a very complex bit of accounting that goes on. And sometimes they get it wrong. For example, I mentioned the genre guys just did this wonderful documentary about Drew, who illustrated all of these great videos. Well, the end of the movie, he's at Comic-Con in San Diego signing this beautiful coffee table book of all of his stuff. And they talked about how they had 500 copies only, and they sold out of them in about an hour and a half. And I'm sitting there going, I understand the publisher thinking, well, I don't want to have to bring any back. And what's it going to cost to ship them? But if somebody estimated there would only be 500 people at San Diego Comic-Con who'd buy that book for the autograph, what planet are they living on? They should have had 3,500 for God's sakes. Anyway, but you guess and you miss. See, there's this advertising guy, a British guy named Rory, who does these wonderful little things about advertising online. I was watching him, yesterday, day before. He says, now, if Coca-Cola is by far the most popular non-alcoholic drink on the planet.
Mhm.
So if you work for another company and you come to them and you say, well, I want to compete with Coca-Cola, it's obvious we need something A, that tastes better than Coca-Cola, and B, that costs less than Coca-Cola, and C, that comes in a bigger can for the money so you get more value. You wouldn't lose your job. That all makes perfect sense. He says, but do you know what the number one competition for Coca-Cola has been through history? It tastes terrible. It comes in a tiny can, and it's Red Bull. Red Bull.
Really?
Yeah. Is the most successful. He says, so, your intuition is wrong. So
Intuition's wrong.
I watched one of his this morning where he's talking about, he says they brought a bunch of engineers together to try and do something to make the tunnel train that goes from England to France more attractive to people. And it was about a 3.5-hour ride from London to Paris. And he says the engineers got together and they did a bunch of things, and they realized if they retracked certain sections, they could make the ride half an hour shorter. Oh, well, that ought to bring people in. No. He says it was going to be like $3 billion to do this. He says for much less than $3 billion, what you could do is have all the supermodel, beautiful people in the world in scanty costumes, male and female, continuously traversing the train, pouring free high-end champagne. People wouldn't care about making it shorter. They'd hope it was longer, and it would be cheaper.
That's a good
But again,
point.
marketing this lightsaber is all about estimating the audience. And if they get it right, swell. And if they don't, well, we had a chance, but at least we made money at that price.
Right.
I'm not buying it, in case anybody's wondering.
Hey, a Mara Jade lightsaber? That's pretty cool. It's genuinely pretty cool right there. Only because I really love that character. So sad to see what they did with the EU, but c'est la vie. There you go. But
well, we as usual run the gamut from everything to everything. But
hey, that's what we do, Lou. That's what being on the backlot is all about, I say.
Go and show me. He's talking about that hilt is so big. I agree. I've never even seen the character, but man, that's a lot to hold.
That's a lot to hold. I don't think Mara Jade's lightsaber was quite that thick, but
of course, I assume this is plastic and therefore not enormously heavy like it would be had it been a real metal.
No, these are usually metal.
Well, but I mean, it's not. Hasn't got the works in it to make the laser come out. That's all I'm saying. So it's not that heavy.
Well, yes. Usually you attach a blade to it. Yeah, I understand fully. But hey, you know what? There you go. They're out there for the people who want to buy them. Thank you so much for buying into our show and watching us for an hour. Very much appreciate that. Like I said, though, if you want to go ahead and send us a message, you can at t3ponline@yahoo.com. Very much appreciate that. Also, too, I got some information. Snow White's tickets are going to be on sale, or going on sale March 12th. So we've got some reports saying that, hey, can't buy tickets. Is Disney scrapping this thing? Nope, they're not. It's just the rollout is a little bit late. Go ahead, Lou.
Well, no, they can't scrap it now. They could have along the way that that Batgirl movie was dumped and other things. But at a certain point,
too far in.
The momentum is too huge, and the number of people who will be blamed is too numerous. And all I can say is no personal animosity towards her in saying this, but Miss Zegler better get real good at asking, do you want fries with that, or some other profession in the world, because she is literally poison. She has made herself into literal poison, and all the canceled press in London and all the other things that they're doing to try and minimize her participation. She's still in the damn movie.
She is.
So
she's the star, so it's you can't
and when we talk about hate viewing or whatever, a lot of people will go see it just to see what the heck the ruckus is about for the first week. But then word of mouth, folks. When I used to know a guy who was the head of advertising and publicity at one of the major studios, and we talked about all those billboards that they put up on Sunset Boulevard and in Times Square, and he said it's all great and it's all ego strokes for the participants because it doesn't sell tickets.
Mhm.
What sells tickets is word of mouth. What sells tickets is Monday morning at work. People say, "What'd you do this weekend?" You say, "Oh, I went to see this great movie," or "I went to see this POS movie. Don't go." That's what sells tickets. That's what
Yes.
makes the second week and the third week go up instead of fall off by 75% or whatever, like with Captain America.
Mm-hmm.
People,
Sometimes you just gotta get rid of a
especially as the price of going to the movies between the tickets and the bargain popcorn and the other accoutrement and the babysitter and whatever, the
Mhm.
more that goes up, the more people have to really make not just a spur of the moment decision like you and I as kids used to make of, hey, let's go to the movies.
Sure.
But now they have to really want to. Um, there's my old joke again about how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb has to really want to change. So
It's so true. It's so true.
and on
Well,
that note, fulfilling
and on-
everyone's expectations of the least common denominator of Lou's humor, although maybe
Yes.
the one about the Bond character did it worse or better or something.
Yep.
But I should have said perky, shouldn't I, instead of what I said? But what the hell? What the hell? It's in the record books now.
It's in the record books now. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible episode of Hollywood Backlot with Lou and you. Hopefully you got a kick out of everything that we talked about here today. And hey, if you liked us, go ahead and hit that like button. Very much would appreciate that. And if you really like us, share us out. That'll be fantastic.
Yes,
And
tell the world all about us. We're here every Sunday, except maybe there's one coming up where we're going to have to do a best of because I got to be on the road.
oh yes,
But we're here every Sunday at 2:00 Eastern time. Whether that's Eastern Daylight or nightlife or anything else is up to you and God and the government, not us. But we're still here. You know,
that's fantastic.
I mean, thank God this one is not so bad in my experience. It's the one at the other end, which for some reason always comes right about Halloween. And I think all those little kids out there in the dark, and everybody's just had their hour change. It's astounding to me that we don't kill thousands of trick-or-treaters with automobiles, having all that happen the same weekend. It usually seems to happen the same weekend, but
Right.
let's bless the beasts and the children and all that sort of thing. I'd rather
Indeed.
put the children first, but that's just me being an old fuddy-duddy. Okay, we've been doing this long enough for today, and Vash, as usual, has 43 million edits to do.
yes.
I guess the beef movie is going to come out soon, right? And then what's after that?
Yes, it is. It's going to come out soon. The time that I set aside to do the beef movie, well, I actually had to dedicate to the Lost Guys and putting it on this platform. Had to create the template for that and so forth. And now it's going to be on a regular rotation, and the Genre Guys is still going to be coming out. I will probably have to cut back on the number of images that I actually put on those videos right there in order to get them out to you on a more
absolutely.
regular basis. So
And by the way, speaking of the Lost Guys, our guest host, while Hangry has been wandering the universe for the last few weeks, has been Nolan Thunder, who's been great doing sub work, and he's our host on this one we just did, which if you're a member, and you should be, of the Pro channel, is there waiting for you. You know, these Pro shows lately, very generous people keep getting 50, 100, 200 memberships. And all these people suddenly find out, oh my God, it's a member. I want to remind you that gives you access to the Genre Guys. And just to tease it even further, if you want to finance your own entry into that select club, as I said, we just did this wonderful documentary about this brilliant Drew Struzan, the illustrator of all of these great posters of our lives. Well, guess what? As I said on the show when we recorded it Saturday night, the next one, shame on us, is a documentary too. It's a learning movie. It's a teaching movie. It's called How to Murder Your Wife. With Terry Thomas and Jack Lemmon, and it's just such fun. And then we're doing one of my favorite off-center sci-fi movies, written and directed by Michael Crichton himself, and that's Looker. And that's a great picture. And in between, I think we're going to do Big Trouble in Little China.
Ooh.
So we've got lots of great, great movies to explore there, and you can be a part of it there or here or anywhere in between. So
Indeed.
come on along.
Indeed.
The water's fine. Dive in.
Dive dive right in, hit that subscribe button, be a subscriber, get all the Lost Guys and Genre Guys so you can possibly shake a stick at, and become a member at the Bro channel to get Genre Guys as soon as they are released. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week.